11 o'clock on your Friday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you, wrapping up first full week of camp. You guys were out at practice this morning. Big scrimmage coming up tomorrow, the first one of fall camp. Please tell me we've answered all of our questions at practice this morning, guys.
I can tell you that. Yeah, I'm reading. I'm getting the exclusive scoop because I could up until now I could see Wes's laptop. We're gonna have some observations, some insights.
Got to subscribe to Gamecock Central.
Yes. Well, we're not going to give away everything, but got to give them a little appetizer of what's to come, right?
Tyler, I'm gonna tell you everything you want to know.
Okay.
What do you want to know?
Everything.
The specifics.
Everything. Position group by position group. Give me the detail of who's starting, who's the backup, and who's the third string.
Is starting.
Coming out of spring.
Coming out of fall.
Well, that one's a given. I didn't need the detail on that one necessarily, but as we've been talking about the entire offseason and even through this entire week so far, so many questions with this team. We're not going to figure out every single answer in 1 week, in one scrimmage, even through the entire fall camp. There's going to be things we're still going to be wondering about as we get into the first game. And it seems like once again today, like the other two sessions you guys got to watch, a lot of special team stuff, watching guys returning kicks and stuff like that, which is still important. Maybe kind of an underrated aspect of something that we're wondering about this offseason. What did you guys see this morning?
I would say, first and foremost, Bam Martin Scott back out there.
Right.
And so when you hear hamstring, you just never know. And he indicated earlier this week, like, hey, I expect to be back out there soon. And the word soon in injury terms can have very different meanings, as we've seen. So to see him back out there, he was, fully dressed, not in a blue non-contact, didn't appear to be limited. I think that's a good sign. Like, we know that they've got depth at that linebacker spot. We've talked about that quite a bit. But you don't want to start kind of checking away at that depth already. That's certainly something you don't want to do, and you don't want a hamstring to be something that can linger. So, you obviously have different kind of grades to the strain of a hamstring, and for that to be what appeared to be a very minor thing, and him to be back out there, I don't think he would be on the field at all if they thought it was possibly serious. So I think that's a good sign. That was probably, and maybe he's been back out there before today, but this is certainly the first time he's back out there and full go that we were there and able to see. On the other end of it, a few guys that were over on the side doing kind of rehab and conditioning, which is what they do if you are not dressed out, if you're not like fully cleared for practice. Vandrevius Jacobs, the wide receiver, Juju McDowell, and then offensive lineman Ja'Kai Moore and Marquis Anderson. I will say this, though, especially watching the skill guys in particular, like Jacobs and McDowell, I mean, it wasn't like, and none of the guys were just standing over there. So I think there's a difference a lot of time. Like, if you see a guy doing quote-unquote rehab and conditioning and they're just standing there, that means, they're truly held out. If they're going through some drill work and going through some different things, then that typically means it's not going to be something that keeps them out for a while. And like I said, the two skill guys, Jacobs and McDowell, they appeared to be moving around. There were no obvious, sometimes, you'll see, oh, that guy's wearing a boot or that guy's wearing a cast or something like that. There were no obvious issues with those two guys. And then, of course, we know at this point Marquis Anderson has been kind of coming back for some stuff in the spring and dating back to last fall. Had his knee, had the back. And then Ja'Kai, I talked to Ja'Kai during a Garnet Trust interview. And Ja'Kai, it kind of sounds like at his age within this program, there maybe is a little bit of just management in terms, like he's dealt with a lot of injuries in his career. So they have tried to kind of manage his overall rep count. I'm not saying that's necessarily what was happening today, but just seeing him over there didn't really set off any alarm bells for me, because that is something that I know he mentioned, kind of getting to the season healthy was a big part of a big priority for him. So we will certainly hear from Shane Beamer tomorrow afternoon, and he will give injury updates, I'm sure, on all those guys.
Yeah, and another one, by the way, I don't know, Wes, because this is practice 7, which sounds weird to say. This is the third that we've seen. We'll see one more on Sunday, which is after the Saturday scrimmage. But Desmond Umeozulu was back. Now, he may have been back for, again, a longer time, but we did put eyes on him. He'd been dealing with an illness, so that's good.
And Jared Brown.
And Jared Brown.
Yes, he was in blue day 2, practicing but in blue, which in Gamecock football terminology means that don't hit that guy. Like he's non-contact. And so generally that means you've got something going on, but they would just want to be careful with you. Today, he was back full go.
Blue is the new yellow.
Yes.
And has been for a while.
For old school.
And then you got the green quarterback jersey.
Was that a Beamer thing switching to blue, or how long has that been around?
Did he have the yellow when they first got to?
I don't know. Was Muschamp yellow?
I feel like it was. But I could be wrong. But
Sounds
anyway.
right.
Yeah, but a couple things off that. Number one, to go back to the guys, the load management that you talked about. With a lot of those guys, we're not really sure. And then, of course, during the actual season itself, continue practice during the season. Obviously, you just don't have preseason camp and then you just go play a bunch of games. You never practice in between. I mean, guys, it's football. Guys play hurt.
Sure.
You just don't want to be injured. Almost everybody is going to be hurt. And there are different, obviously, levels to that. And so we know that there are players, and there have been many players in the past at South Carolina, very prominent players, where they didn't really practice a lot during the year. And there's two sides to that. One of them is kind of just injury prevention. Mm-hmm. We don't want you're a junior, senior, you're an important starter. We're not going to run you out there max effort at practice every day and risk injury. Practicing when I don't want to say you don't need to practice, but for guys like that, it's not as important. Or they're just dealing with some actual, physical ailments. I mean, I know like Travian Robertson sometimes, or some of the D linemen, like when he was playing, it's the points get you to Saturday,
sure,
especially when you're in the course of the season. Same thing with Brian Edwards. Like you'd always see Brian Edwards during games. You're like, man, is Brian okay? And then he goes and makes some amazing plays. So load management is an important thing. The second part of this is, so far, and everybody should knock on wood, they've been pretty good from an injury standpoint in terms of legitimate actual injuries, not, guys missing a day or two, things like that. As you said, Wes, they have built up some legitimate depth at certain spots. But here's what you would like to do. Can you keep that depth? Can you not dip into that depth and have it be, there have been a couple seasons, like we always talk about linebacker. I remember one year in particular, you go into the season and you say, okay, they got 4 guys they feel pretty decent about. Well, one of them immediately gets hurt. So now you're down to 3 and you got your basically 2 starters and a backup and everybody's having to play too much. You've now at certain spots built up some depth. Can you keep everybody healthy throughout the course of the year? It's been a big emphasis this offseason. Again, some things you can't control, but some things they've changed and tweaked because they feel like maybe it will help. Can you keep everybody healthy so you have that legitimate depth where you can run line changes on the D-line like they want, where you can continue having competition on the offensive line and the edge position, et cetera? So it's there was so much talk about injuries, rightfully so, last year, and the team's health definitely had a negative effect. It was one of the factors. So, will that be better this season? So far, it's, so good.
Well, and like Beamer talked about when he spoke to media, I guess it was, last week, and changing some of the procedures that they do as far as stretching and, strength and conditioning and that kind of stuff, which I'm not saying this is why the injuries were happening a year ago, but making sure you're doing everything you can to prevent injuries from happening based on your preparation and based on what you're doing within the walls of your program. And again, when you're playing football, guys are going to get rolled up on, guys are going to get hit the wrong way. Injuries are going to happen that way. But doing everything you can within your own power to prevent injuries from the way that you prepare is, kind of a big MO that they've had this offseason that hopefully will translate to being healthier across the board, particularly at specific spots that were just snake bitten last year with injuries.
Yeah, you have to, man. And I think particularly with those big men, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, just making sure, they've adjusted some things in the strength and conditioning this offseason and, not completely revamping what they're doing, but just kind of tweaking things here and there. I think that goes a long way with the big guys because, the bigger guys, I think, are already a little bit more susceptible to certain injuries. And so anything you can do to maybe get them in a little bit better shape, can go a long way in terms of trying to keep those guys healthy. And then just having depth, I think even in terms of going into a season, just having to play so many, it's kind of like a snowball effect or if you don't have depth, then you have to play your guys more anyway. Right. So if you're playing more reps, statistically, you are more likely to get hurt.
Sure.
So then what is a lack of depth contributes to even more lack of depth. And so you do hope that by being able to rotate guys, keep them fresh, and get some different guys on the field, that in turn also will help your depth kind of grow a little bit.
Let's have a full write-up of everything they observed from practice today on GamecockCentral.com. We'll dive into this scrimmage coming up tomorrow. Preston and I had an interesting conversation this morning as he looked back on some things from prior first scrimmages at South Carolina under Beamer's tenure, and sometimes what you have coming away from it can be a little bit misleading. We'll dive into that coming up next. Real quick reminder, the greatest moment in Gamecock sports since the year 2000. On its final day of voting on 107.5 The Game's Twitter page, vote on your favorite moment. We'll crown our overall winner coming up on Monday and talk about them all day long. Jay's going to be broadcasting live from Columbia Craft at 520 Green Street down in the Vista as well, as they've been our presenting partner of our greatest Gamecock moment since the year 2000. Again, go and vote on at 107.5 The Game's Twitter page. Today is the last day to get your vote in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Friday here on The Game.
Was just checking out Integrated Media's Instagram account, guys. Integrated Media Columbia, put some underscores in between each of those words. Integrated Media Columbia, go check it out. If you want some really cool inspiration photos of some things that you could do around your house as well. Football season, of course, is right around the corner. So a lot of us are going to be outdoors on our patio or screen porch or really in the yard watching some football, streaming our favorite programs, streaming some really good tunes while we do it as well. Something that really cool that they did recently, Michael, Nathan, and the team at Integrated Media, 7 Sonos wireless amps to replace someone's old sound system. Now that customer can stream all their favorite music on Apple Music, Spotify, and they can control it with their phone. They also upgraded their Wi-Fi that extended all the way into their backyard. Stream all your favorite shows, college football, music, integratedmediacolumbia.com or 803-948-8327.
Well, welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on this Friday. Again, tomorrow, the first scrimmage of fall camp for South Carolina. No media availability there, so whatever information we get will be from Coach Beamer afterwards and whatever other coaches and players we hear from in the coming weeks about what happens out there. Press and I this morning on the early game, we're talking a little bit about some of the past opening scrimmages during Beamer's time here. And he in particular went back and looked at, y'all's reporting on last year's opening scrimmage. And it was very interesting to note what the reports coming away from was. And again, this is controlled by the coaches and stuff like that. But, they were talking about Omega Blake at the wide receiver spot, DeCarrion Joyner looking really good at running back, those kind of things that didn't quite end up translating over into what we saw during the regular season. So as excited as we are to learn things about this team, how hesitant do you have to be with what we see and what we hear about this first scrimmage on what's going to translate when the season gets here?
I mean, I think you got to have some perspective as well. I mean, Omega Blake making some plays in the scrimmage, I had forgotten that, honestly, but it was factual, I'm sure. So you got to have some perspective on, all right, he made some plays.
Yeah.
But I think it was noteworthy because Omega going into the season was not really a guy that maybe would have been talked about a ton. Like, he had not done a ton in his career to that point. And he actually ended up starting several games for South Carolina last year.
Yep.
I think he was at the spot that Harbor kind of took over, but then they were rotating, and then you had injuries. So, he was on the field last year. So I think that was more noteworthy at the time in terms of like, hey, here's a guy who's emerging a bit from what the expectation was for them prior to that. Joyner, that was a situation where there's a dire need at running back. And he stepped over, did everything asked in the offseason, kind of got used to the position, and there was maybe a little bit of hope attached to that because it was like, I think, hey, we need DeCarrion to be really good. Now, I will say this. I don't know how much of a chance DeCarrion ever had behind that offensive line.
True.
As a guy who was stepping into the position for the first time and trying to get his feet under him. And how many opportunities did he really have to where he was able to hit an open hole and just get settled in and kind of learn? Now, you can go into all the other, well, hey, is it even fair that this guy's having to do that, having to go through that? That's a roster thing. Now, we saw Mario Anderson get inserted in there. He's a guy who's played a bunch of ball, not at the SEC level, but has certainly played a ton of running back in his career. And he was able to kind of make some things happen, right? So I do think, I think to Preston's point, he's saying you can't take the scrimmages and make them mean everything. And you certainly can't take just the things we hear from the scrimmage and make them mean everything. Sometimes, hey, pass rush looks great. Okay, what about the pass pro? Hey, receivers look great. Okay, what about the corners? So, there's always going to be those details as well. And so I think what I'd take away from scrimmages, for one, do we hear a guy's name both weekends? That would be a sign of, hey, there might be some consistency to what they can do. And the other part is, do we hear some names where either they're entrenched in a battle for a position and we're hearing one name as opposed to the other? And, sort of do we start to hear some names that maybe we didn't have as high expectations for? That may mean they're in the rotation at their particular position. So Joyner, did he have statistically have a great year last year? Obviously, safe to say, he did not.
Right.
But did he end up starting? Yes. I mean, I remember there was a point. It went y'all remember the sort of the progression from, hey, Joyner's going to take some reps at running back. Like it wasn't even like pegged as he's going to be a start, or it wasn't even pegged as he was going to be a running back. It was he's going to take some reps at running back.
Yeah, I mean, he was a body filling the room in the spring last year, essentially.
And then it shifted to like, oh well, he's like a running back. Then it was, oh, he's listed on the roster as a running back, full on.
Yeah,
change your position. You're not just lining up in the backfield. You're changing your position to running back. And then I remember one day being like, dude, he's going to start. And so it didn't work out. But I think internally that maybe showed the direction they were headed. It wasn't necessarily overall successful. But I do think sometimes you do get some hope injected into this as well, because I know internally they were hoping that would be the move that would help solidify that position.
Well, and I also think it can go both ways. So thinking back to that time, I think there was hope. I also think, just from some of the things that we heard and even observed in practice when we did get to watch, like Dakereon Joyner made some nice runs. The staff seemed to be pretty high on it. Nobody was saying, I'm just going to go out and win the Heisman. Like, nobody said that. Nobody thought that. But I do think what ended up happening on the field, there was a disconnect, but a lot of that was because, I'm looking at SEC StatCat, Clark Brooks. Dakereon Joyner had 50 carries last year, a total of 120 yards, 24 yards before contact. That's horrific, for anybody. And especially for somebody who's not played running back since, Pop Warner or whenever that was, that's a tough deal. On the flip side of that, we had heard some good things about Mario Anderson, but I think it's safe to say, guys, that Mario Anderson probably outperformed what we all thought, and maybe even the staff by the time the season went around. So if you're someone that says, don't say anything good about practice, they couldn't have done anything, you learned nothing from a team because they went 5-7. Well, you do still learn some things. And Omega Blake, right? He did make some plays in practice. Was part of that because the secondary ended up having some struggles throughout the year? They did in man coverage.
Sure.
But Omega Blake also entered last season with a total of 1 catch in his career. Mm-hmm. He did have 19 catches, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, so he did improve.
Right.
Saying a guy made some plays in practice doesn't mean you're saying he's going to win the Blitnikoff. It's just, you do have to put these things in perspective.
And mentioning Mario Anderson, that was another thing from that report that he brought up, was it was noted that he was showing some flashes. Which, again, at that point in time, first scrimmage last year, we were wondering if he was going to be able to translate.
I'll take that, though. I'll take that.
Exactly. We were wondering if he was going to be able to translate from playing D2 ball to playing in the SEC, which was our big question with him going into the season. He ended up being the best running back out of the group, which, again, with the offensive line and stuff, didn't really help out all that much. But he no doubt showed he had the ability to play at this level, ripped off some big runs last year. But there was that little inkling that, okay, he's on the right track with what you saw in the first scrimmage a year ago.
I've always been fascinated by, as much as it is a line of scrimmage game. By the way, Preston, shout out to him. He is listening. He said, yes, Wes, that's exactly what I was saying. I think to what I said a second ago. He said, wait and see. Things will develop. And so I've always been fascinated. Yes, it is a line of scrimmage game. How some running backs can, like, they have to have room in order to consistently run the football, right? Mm-hmm. But some running backs are able to I feel like it's on a sliding scale. Like, some running backs may need a little bit more room to be successful than like a Marcus Lattimore, for example. And I'm not saying Mario was Marcus, but Mario Anderson came in there. No, he gave them a boost in the running game. Like, it was not like the running game was non-existent when Mario Anderson was in there. He gave them some different things. There was a long run, as bad as that Tennessee game was. He had a very long run against them that
75 yards.
Possibly at the time looked like, well, does this get them back in the game? So I think it takes all those things working together. But it is, I mean, to be honest, I kind of am now curious to go back and see what else we may have said, although I'm a little scared.
Yeah. This guy who didn't do anything looks great. Yeah, I mean, but here's the other thing, too. Wes, we got a guy on our YouTube channel who always says if we say anything at all positive, he says, well, unstoppable, whatever. And it's like, no, you can point out, like you literally would have to be not paying attention if you said, take the linebacker room from last year and this year. If you said, no, they don't have any more depth, like, what are you doing? That doesn't mean that they're going to be the best defense in the country, right? You can point out these things. The key is, how does it work? How does it match up against your opponents? And I had somebody make a good point that relates this morning. Someone texted me, pays close attention to the program, and said that basically, it's just such a tough league, and the schedule is so tough that you can improve your own team, sometimes kind of significantly at multiple spots, like we think South Carolina's done, and it doesn't end up changing your bottom line because maybe some of those other programs also improve their situations. And so I think what it means, like you look at Kentucky week 2, big test. South Carolina, yes, they've improved.
Right.
But I think probably on paper, so is Kentucky. So it's just about how many strides are you making, how much have you improved.
And again, that scrimmage coming up tomorrow. We'll hear from Coach Beamer after that and have plenty to talk about when Monday does roll around. We'll get into some recruiting coming up next. A national college football writer posed an interesting question about South Carolina's recruiting with the 2025 class. We'll hit that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Friday on the Game.
Wes and I were just talking about how hungry we both are. So, I mean, it honestly, it hurts to talk about because I can't go get it right now at 11:30. But in about 30 minutes, I can go get myself a delicious Firehouse Subs. And I can also get it very quickly for 2 reasons. Number one, there's one right down the road from where we are on USC campus at 833 Main. But if you're not near downtown, if you're somewhere else in the Midlands, the good news is that there's 13 others. There's a total of 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations, so no matter where you are in the Midlands, there's one close to you. On top of that, you can use the Rapid Rescue to go. You can go to firehousesubs.com, or you can download the Firehouse Subs app. You can avoid the wait and order online, so it'll be waiting on you when you get in the store. And the other great part about that, bonus cherry on top, is that you can get yourself some rewards toward future purchases when you order through firehousesubs.com on your free account, or use the app. That's firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Ed West Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Friday. Of course, this time last week, we were getting the commitment from Kendall Daniels, 4-star safety out of Virginia, to add to South Carolina's 2025 class that is coming along pretty nicely. But compared to the past couple classes that Beamer's been able to pull in, not quite comparable in a lot of ways. Antonio Morales of The Athletic wrote this article the other day about panic levels for certain programs across college football, and he posed the question for South Carolina: is the momentum gone? Now, Carolina's still got a top 30 class as of right now. Again, tons of 4-star talent, but he points out the
top
fact
25 class, isn't it?
He's going off 24/7 rankings, so a little bit differently there. But he points out, as we often talk about, 3-star mafia, twice as many 3-stars as 4-stars. You don't have as many blue chip guys in the state of South Carolina. Obviously, no 5-star in this class like the past couple classes. So it's not that this class is bad, but it's not comparable in the same way as the past couple have been that have really surprised a lot of people, I guess.
What's the question?
Is the momentum gone, according to him?
I think here's the thing. The momentum for that class has definitely been affected by the way last season went. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the other thing. The momentum within a program is constantly either there or gone based on what you do in a particular season, because everybody overreacts so much these days.
Sure.
And maybe this has always been the case to an extent, but because we're all talking about it on social media, that when you overreact to something, I mean, I remember going into last season when South Carolina was a darling, and because of the way they finished the year before, and people were like, Beamer has overachieved the first 2 seasons. He brings back Rattler. What does he have in store for this year? And so then you have a disappointing season, and people are ready to bury you. And we don't really sort of even acknowledge anymore that, hey, sports have all these different potential outcomes, and that you're playing teams that are, for the most part, fairly similar to you athletically. And so, what is the difference if South Carolina has a couple of things go different last year and they go 7-5 versus 5-7? What's the difference in the perception of the program? So right now, the momentum for that class is definitely being hurt because other schools are hammering South Carolina for the season last year. A season that I will say, as much as people are negative about last year, this was not a year that went off the tracks. We've seen seasons at South Carolina go completely off the rails. We've seen 2-10. We've seen situations where you just throw your hands up and you're like, this team is cooked. That was not the case. They bounced back from 2-6, won 3 straight games, and really should have been able to put up a better fight against Clemson, in my opinion. But I'm not saying that as hey, this should have happened. I'm saying this more like the perception in sports based on a handful of plays can basically make there is no middle ground anymore. As much as people like to use the word mid, which I hate that word, as much as that word is used, though, everything for the most part is to an extreme. You're either amazing and on the rise, or you stink and you're getting fired. And even if that's not the reality, that's where the perceptions go. So, yeah, I mean, this is a top 25 class on 3, or it was. It's right around 25. But because it's not quite to the level of the last couple of classes, people are going to go way, way, way negative about it.
Yeah, and, when you mention the kind of the year-to-year nature of things, the week-to-week nature, I mean, that's really what it is, like the perception. I mean, the classic example that we talked about ad nauseum in 2022 was South Carolina looked completely dead after they got beat 38-6 at Florida. And they scored 63 points the next week against Tennessee, and then they beat Clemson. And, so it's not incredibly far-fetched to think that a team could have, a bad year last year, call it like it is, but go improve this coming season. That's not, like, you can see the path to it. I don't know yet if that'll happen. I haven't really gotten that far. I try to think about it, but I think there's so many questions about this team and other teams that they're going to play. It's kind of hard to predict it right now. But what I do know, and Shane Beamer talked about this, at Birdies with Beamer, and he talked about it. He's talked about it in multiple preseason press conferences before and during practice. The perception of this class and the perception of the program, it can be turned around, and it's just all about winning. There are lots of different elements to recruiting, and it's, are your coaches good at recruiting? Do you have a good structure? What's the NIL picture look like, which that has improved in Columbia actually as of late. The long-term outlook is a lot better than it was, last year even. But at the end of the day, you got to win games. The programs that are winning and recruiting the best, first of all, they're winning.
Sure.
And they typically always have won. So that you're already, up against it right there. But a lot like Georgia, they're not out there recruiting because they're giving the highest NIL deals. They're extremely competitive there, but they develop and they win. And generally, people want to play for winning programs. And so, yes, their perception has taken a hit. I've heard the same as Wes. They're getting absolutely hammered on the trail with 5-7, hot seat, and whatever. All you got to do to fix that, go win. And then you can say, hey, look what we did. First 2 years, we exceeded expectations. We took a step back last year. The coaching staff at that point, if they go out and win 8 games this year or something like that, they can say the only reason that we lost 5 games in 2022 is because we had so many, or 23 is because we had so many injuries.
Right.
Doesn't matter if it's true or not. You know, so, it's all about just winning this season, and that's going to give you a chance to turn that momentum back in your favor.
Absolutely. So we'll see what happens. And again, not that this 25 class is bad by any means. It's just stacking up to what the past couple classes have been, not quite on the same level, but time, still plenty of time before we get to early sign day in December for things to continue to improve with that 2025 class. We'll come back, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. I'm going to let Wes rant about a certain former Tennessee quarterback. It's coming up next here on The Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrod Westminster, Chris Clark, along with you for a couple more minutes here. Last night, NFL preseason getting underway. Panthers and Patriots. I'd play a Panthers highlight, but there weren't really any highlights for the Panthers, unfortunately.
Dang, Tyler.
Losing 17-3. Playing with most of their backups. Former Gamecock Kevin Harris scored a touchdown for the Patriots last night.
Marcel played for the Patriots.
Played for the Patriots. So you did have some interest to watch. Xavier Legette dealing with an injury right now. Did not play last night, but he is day-to-day. I expect to be good to go when the season gets going here in a couple weeks. But one thing coming out of this game and in the days leading up to it was a certain amount of hype around one Joe Milton. Much like we saw last year leading up to the season, that arm that can throw the ball 800 miles is garnering a lot of attention once again.
You are literally the second person to be like, hey, y'all see this Joe Milton hype?
Because everybody's talking about it. NFL Twitter is having a field day with this.
Our NFL Twitter and college football Twitter, and then for that matter, SEC Twitter, interconnected?
There's some crossover, but it's not always the same people.
I feel like the Venn diagram is that there's not as much crossover as you might think.
Sure.
Because I feel like college football Twitter and SEC Twitter is probably like, nah.
Yeah.
We saw this movie before. We already saw how it ends.
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up, because we know we've seen this before. Like, we get it, but there's so many people, and look, there's a lot of people up in New England that don't watch college football, that have never seen him play at Tennessee, that just go off what they see in practice or camp. Like, man, why are we worried about Drake May? This guy's the future.
Well, it is when you get a guy that kind of breaks the rules of the game, it is fun to think about, because this guy can stretch a defense so far if you have time to act. Which I don't know if you have time to even do it in the NFL, but if you have enough time to throw, the distance he can throw a ball literally breaks some of the defenses you can run from like a scheme standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But how often does a guy actually throw a ball 70 yards in the NFL?
Not a lot.
Like maybe in a Hail Mary situation, I
Sure.
guess. But otherwise, I don't know. Like, it's fun to talk about, but I don't really think it's that conducive to good quarterback play at all.
So I remember when Joe Milton was getting recruited out of high school, and I thought he was a really good prospect then. And then, the Michigan time was just very uneven, and he finally got his chance at Tennessee. And to be up front, like, I don't subscribe to he's going to be an elite NFL quarterback based on him scrambling in a game last night, or the fact that he can throw it over the mountain or whatever. But, like, he was pretty good at Tennessee last year.
Yeah, he was good.
I mean, he had 65% completions, 2,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 picks. Now, how much of it was that system?
How does that compare to Hendon Hooker?
Well, Hendon Hooker had, insane stats.
Hendon Hooker was the perfect type of quarterback for what Josh Heupel's offense is. And Milton kind of felt like a bit of a square peg and round hole. Like, again, the elements are there, but he wasn't exactly what they were looking for, I don't think.
I tend to think, man, if you can't put up big numbers in that offense, and I know they're not the same teams, like different skill guys, I know, but it's just, I'd be shocked if he was great at the NFL level.
Hendon in his last season was 22. Yeah, there we go. Played against South Carolina that year and got injured, unfortunately. He had 3,100 yards, 70% completions, 27 touchdowns to 2 picks. So, I mean, statistically, he had a little bit of a better year. Not incredibly better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was a good college quarterback. He's got great physical tools. There's no doubt about it.
He being Joe Milton?
Yeah. I mean, Hendon Hooker too. But, yeah, I'm talking about Joe Milton. I mean, just he's got everything. But, man, it's about so much more than that. So.
Yeah. And again, there's a reason he was a late round pick and Drake May was a first round pick, because there's a lot more upside potential than what Drake May brings. And he went out there and, played a couple series, and, he's coming along. It seems like Jacoby Brissett's going to be the starter, at least to start the season, and then May will come along, as you often see in situations like that. So, I'm sure Milton will garner a lot of conversation over the next couple weeks, but it's still going to be Drake May's job here as the season rolls along.
Well, let's talk about somebody more local. Spencer Rattler.
Yes.
He's going to get his first opportunity, presumably, on Saturday.
I was going to ask you,
at 8
when
p.m.
do they play, and will it be on TV here?
The TV problem I can't solve.
To be determined.
We'll get the investigative team on that. But
they play Saturday night.
They play Saturday at 8 p.m. Saints versus Cardinals, and Rattler has been talked up a good bit.
Yes, he
in
has.
New Orleans.
Well, and you would assume scrimmage, it's basically a scrimmage. Preseason 1, he's going to play a lot, right?
Right.
He may start.
Yeah, you've got Derek Carr, who's the presumed starter, veteran, and then Rattler and Jake Haener are, they're backups right now. So
Rattler and Haener have been battling.
Yes.
For the number 2 spot.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to get a look. Preseason isn't going to tell us everything, those games. I mean, if you watched the game last night, I don't know what you can take away from it. It's pretty good. I told Wes earlier I turned it on, and, Jack Plummer was starting for the Panthers, and the only play I saw was a sack fumble. Like that.
No relation to Jake, by the way.
Really?
Nope.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Not related.
That's right, yeah. Oh, you always think he is. But, yeah, so I don't know how much you can take away, but if Spencer goes out there and has a nice performance, then, maybe you can take something away from it.
By the way, the game will not be live on the NFL Network coming up tomorrow, but you can DVR it because it is replaying early Sunday morning. So if you want to go back and watch it Sunday,
I'll do that.
You can do that on the NFL Network.
Okay.
Because they play all the preseason games at some point, some of them live, some of them not. But yes, if you want to get a first glimpse at Spencer Rattler with the New Orleans Saints, you can do that this upcoming weekend, where, again, there's a lot of conversation that, Derek Carr's last year wasn't the most spectacular season, and a lot of belief that Rattler at some point this year could truly threaten him for the starting job.
Yeah, I think eventually. Obviously, the first step, win the number 2 job. And, I think Rattler probably is going to be the guy there, but, you don't know that yet. But I do think this does sort of set up to where, by being a little bit later round draft pick than I'm sure he hoped and wanted to be, you don't have those expectations going into a season. And I've actually heard that Carr has been really good at helping Rattler along, which can be very beneficial as well.
We'll see what happens this weekend. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Terry and Dimitri coming up next on your Friday here on The Game.